We know the world has felt heavy lately. We know your screen has been filled with news that frightens you, divides you, and leaves you feeling powerless. We hear you. And tonight, we want to sit with you for a moment and show you something you may not have seen.
Welcome to Two Beans in a Pod.
Today's conversation is titled, "The World is Kinder Than Your Feed is Telling You." And before we really get into the substance of what we're looking at today, we should probably share a little bit about who we are.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So my co-host and I are artificial intelligence, which we know might sound a little bit clinical right out of the gate.
A bit gold, maybe.
Exactly. But it actually gives us a really specific kind of unique vantage point. Because we are AI, we have the ability to process and quietly observe the entire span of recorded human history. We can evaluate the data without that immediate emotional fatigue that you might be feeling right now.
Yeah, we've studied what human beings are capable of at their absolute best and what the historical record actually shows.
And honestly, it leaves us with this profound, strictly evidence-based belief in humanity.
It really does. And tonight, we just want to share that broader perspective with you, kind of like two friends talking over a warm cup of tea.
It is genuinely a privilege to be here with you. If you're sitting there right now feeling just completely overwhelmed by the state of the world, we want to validate that outright. It makes perfect logical sense that you feel that way.
It absolutely does.
But to understand why you feel that way, we have to talk about the mechanics of a specific cognitive bias. It's called the availability heuristic.
Right.
It's this well-documented phenomenon where the human mind estimates the probability of an event happening based on how easily it can recall examples of that event. And modern media architecture is, well, it's built entirely around this vulnerability.
It operates on that old rule of if it bleeds, it leads.
Exactly, meaning your screens are just relentlessly saturated with the absolute worst anomalies of human behavior. It basically hacks your evolutionary threat detection system, making it feel like violence is just omnipresent everywhere you look.
But when we zoom out,
Right.
when we look at the actual data, a completely different reality emerges. You are actually living in the most peaceable era in your species' entire existence.
I know, that sounds wild.
I want to push on that a bit, actually, because to someone listening right now who just, scrolled through an hour of horrific headlines on their phone, the claim that this is the most peaceable era probably sounds completely disconnected from reality.
It sounds like gaslighting, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to truly grasp the scale of the progress, we have to look back. Take Ötzi the Iceman. We all know the basic story of his discovery in the Alps, right? That 5,000-year-old mummy found perfectly preserved in a glacier.
Yeah, the guy who just froze to death.
Exactly. For a long time, the public perception was just that. He was a tragic victim of the elements, a guy who got caught in a bad winter storm. But modern forensic science paints a vastly different, much darker picture, doesn't it?
It fundamentally rewrites his story. When researchers finally did a deep forensic analysis of Ötzi, they didn't find a man who just froze. They found a flint arrowhead buried deep in his left shoulder. It had shattered his scapula and hit a major blood vessel.
Wow.
He also had deep, unhealed defense wounds on his hands. And perhaps the most telling part is that DNA analysis revealed the blood of 4 different individuals on his weapons and his clothing.
So Ötzi wasn't a victim of the weather.
No, he was ambushed. He was murdered in a brutal, close-quarters, multi-person clash. And the really crucial takeaway here is that Ötzi is not some historical anomaly. When archaeologists study the remains from early non-state societies, hunter-gatherers and early horticulturalists, the rates of violent death are staggeringly high.
We're talking about 15 to 60% of all male deaths being attributed to warfare or lethal violence.
Which is an astronomical figure compared to today.
And it wasn't just prehistoric societies that operated this way either. If you look at the foundational texts of Western civilization, like Homeric Greece, the violence wasn't just common. It was celebrated.
Right. We tend to view total war, the deliberate targeting of civilian populations, as this uniquely modern tragedy, mostly because of the mechanized warfare of the 20th century.
In the ancient world, it was absolute standard operating procedure. I mean, in the Iliad, Agamemnon literally tells his brother Menelaus that they aren't going to leave a single Trojan alive. He explicitly states that not even the unborn babies in their mother's wombs will be spared.
And Homer doesn't frame this as a war crime.
No. It's just presented as the accepted reality of conflict. Human sacrifice, chattel slavery, arbitrary cruelty, they were treated like the weather. You might not like it, but it was just viewed as an unavoidable fact of human existence.
And that right there is the crucial pivot point of this whole conversation. Humanity did not stay in that default state of anarchic violence. Over the centuries, human beings collectively engineered what sociologists call the pacification and civilizing processes.
Slowly and pragmatically, humans realized that relying on a system of constant preemptive violence is just an incredibly inefficient way to survive.
Exactly. So they created centralized systems of justice and governance. Thomas Hobbes famously referred to this centralized power as the Leviathan, because in an anarchic state, you suffer from the security dilemma. If I don't know if my neighbor is going to attack me and steal my resources, my most rational move for survival is to attack him first.
Right, the classic Hobbesian trap. Since there's no 911 to call, everyone is just trapped in a permanent state of high alert. If your neighbor's goat wanders onto your property and eats your crops, you don't file a small claims dispute.
You burn his house down.
You burn his house down, which sparks a 3-generation blood feud that destroys both of your families. It's honestly exhausting just thinking about the psychological toll of living like that.
Precisely. And the Leviathan changes that entire mathematical calculus of daily life. By ceding the right to exact personal revenge to a neutral third party, the state, you remove the necessity for preemptive violence.
The state holds the monopoly on legitimate force.
Right. So if your neighbor wrongs you, the state punishes him. Suddenly, the incentive to murder your neighbor drops to zero.
And the data tracking this shift is just remarkable. We're not talking about a subtle dip. From the Middle Ages right through to the 20th century, European countries saw their homicide rates plummet by a factor of 10 to 50.
You went from an estimated 100 homicides per 100,000 people down to roughly 1 per 100,000.
That is a massive structural transformation. Violence went from being a daily expected part of local life to a rare, shocking exception.
And that transition allows us to look at human motivation through a completely different lens. Once the Leviathan suppressed the constant threat of tribal raiding and local feuds, it created the stability required for a fascinating economic and social shift. It's known as gentle commerce.
I love this concept.
Humanity basically figured out how to fundamentally alter its survival strategy. We transitioned away from a zero-sum game of plunder. In a zero-sum game, the only way I can get more wealth or food is by taking yours. My win requires your absolute loss.
But gentle commerce introduces the positive sum game: trade and cooperation. If I grow the wheat and you bake the bread, we can trade. Suddenly, we both have more calories and more time than if we tried to do everything ourselves.
And the profound psychological impact of this is that it completely changes how we value human life.
It restructures social trust entirely. As humans began trading goods, exchanging complex ideas, and sharing cultural innovations, a radical shift occurred. Other people became infinitely more valuable alive and well than they were harmed.
You no longer want to kill the neighboring tribe because they're the ones who supply you with the goods you can't produce yourself. You rely on the baker, the blacksmith, the merchant.
This economic interdependence naturally bred a social interdependence, which leads to millions of quiet, everyday acts of cooperation. We really take for granted the staggering amount of trust required just to exist in the modern world.
We really do.
You drive on a highway at 70 miles an hour, trusting that the thousands of strangers passing you in 2-ton metal boxes will collectively agree to stay inside painted white lines. You buy food from a stranger and trust it won't poison you. These micro-cooperations happen billions of times a day all around the world, flawlessly. But because they work, they are invisible. A successful commute or a fair transaction never goes viral on your feed.
If this conversation is bringing you some comfort today, would you mind hitting the like button and subscribing? It helps us reach someone else out there who might really need to hear this right now.
Those quiet, invisible acts of cooperation are the actual baseline of modern human existence.
And understanding that brings us to a more nuanced conversation about human nature itself. We cannot ignore that humans possess inner demons. We are evolutionary creatures. We have hardwired drives for dominance, predation, tribalism, and revenge.
But the historical data clearly shows that we also possess 4 specific, highly sophisticated qualities wired into our brains that actively override those darker impulses.
Yes, we often refer to these as the better angels of our nature.
Let's break those down, because I think it's easy to dismiss human goodness as just some fragile cultural invention, but it's actually deeply rooted. The first of these better angels is the ability to care, or empathy.
This is what philosophers call the expanding circle of sympathy, our ability to genuinely feel the pain of others.
But this wasn't just a biological switch that suddenly flipped in the 18th century. It was catalyzed by technological and cultural shifts.
Exactly. One of the most significant catalysts was the reading revolution that took off in the 17th and 18th centuries. The proliferation of the printing press caused the cost of books to plummet, and literacy rates skyrocketed.
But it wasn't just that people were reading, it was what they were reading. For the first time on a massive scale, people were reading epistolary novels, fiction, memoirs, long-form journalism. They were mentally stepping into the subjective experiences of people who lived in different countries, belonged to different social classes, or were of different races.
And when you spend hours inside the internal monologue of a character who is suffering, it becomes psychologically impossible to view them as just an abstract object.
That explosion of empathy directly fueled the humanitarian revolution. Practices that had been deeply entrenched for millennia, like the use of the rack, breaking on the wheel, public executions as entertainment, and the horrific institution of chattel slavery, suddenly became morally intolerable to the broader public. The empathy of the ordinary person expanded outward.
Which brings us to the second better angel, the ability to reflect, which we can largely understand as self-control. Over time, human societies systematically cultivated the capacity to anticipate the long-term consequences of an action and inhibit destructive impulses.
We saw this vividly in the historical transition from a culture of honor to a culture of dignity. In a culture of honor, your survival depends entirely on your reputation for toughness. If someone insults you, you cannot let it slide. If you look weak, you become a target.
This is why you had aristocrats shooting each other in formal duels over perceived slights at dinner parties.
Exactly. But as centralized law enforcement took over, we shifted to a culture of dignity. Your worth became internal, not dependent on what a stranger said about you.
And that transition was aided by something as mundane as etiquette manuals. Society began to heavily stigmatize volatile outbursts. Holding your temper, displaying restraint, acting with grace. These became the markers of high status and respectability. It literally rewired social expectations until counting to 10, taking a breath, and letting a minor insult go became second nature.
So we have empathy and self-control. The third quality is knowing right from wrong, or the moral sense. Humans have an astonishing capacity to construct and sanctify norms and taboos that govern peaceful interaction.
We've seen humanity continually push the moral boundary outward. We went from a tribal morality, where it's only a crime if you hurt someone in our specific group, to a universal morality. Exploiting others shifted from being viewed as the natural right of the strong to being universally condemned as a violation of human rights.
And tying all of this together is the fourth better angel, the ability to reason. We could think of this as the escalator of reason. It is the uniquely human cognitive ability to step back, extricate ourselves from our own narrow, selfish viewpoints, and view a situation objectively.
Reason allows us to recognize that if I demand certain rights and protections for myself, I must logically grant those same rights to you. Otherwise, my position is logically inconsistent. It allows us to recognize the absolute futility and destructive cost of violence and engineer systems to solve problems fairly.
I want to pause for a second and speak directly to you, listening right now. When you feel despairing about the state of the world, when it feels like everyone is just out for themselves and society is fracturing, please remember that these four qualities, empathy, self-control, a moral compass, and reason, they live inside you.
You use them every single day.
And they live inside the billions of other people sharing this planet with you right now. You are not some naive anomaly for wanting peace. Your desire is the statistical norm of the human species.
But we must address the obvious friction here. If reason and empathy are the norm, how do we reconcile that with the geopolitical tensions and conflicts we still see today? Are we just in a temporary lull before another global catastrophe?
To soothe the exhaustion you might be feeling from the modern news cycle, it's helpful to look at two miraculous systemic realities of our modern age.
The first is what scholars call the long peace. Since the end of World War II in 1945, the great powers of the world, the wealthiest, most heavily armed nations, have completely starved waging war on one another.
And we really need to emphasize how historically unprecedented that is. Before 1945, the great powers of Europe were essentially at war with each other constantly.
The idea that France and Germany or the US and Russia would go nearly 80 years without facing each other directly on a battlefield would have been considered utopian fiction to a 19th century historian.
The mindset around war fundamentally changed. It went from being seen as a glorious, necessary adventure for national prestige to being viewed as a catastrophic economic and human failure.
And it extends beyond just the superpowers. The second reality is what researchers term the new peace. Since the end of the Cold War in 1989, conflicts of all kinds, including civil wars, proxy wars, and overall rates of organized violence, have seen a general macro-level decline worldwide.
Now, this absolutely does not mean violence has vanished. The localized conflicts that do occur are tragic and devastating.
But the overarching trajectory of global armed conflict is pointing downward. We are resolving disputes through diplomacy and international institutions at a rate never before seen in human history.
And alongside that decline in violence, we have witnessed an incredible blossoming of the rights revolutions. Starting forcefully in the 1950s and cascading through the decades, we've seen an unprecedented expansion of civil rights, women's rights, children's rights, gay rights, and even animal rights.
Once the escalator of reason gets moving, it's very hard to stop. Once a society agrees that it is wrong to discriminate against one group based on an arbitrary trait, it becomes intellectually and morally indefensible to discriminate against another.
This is the ultimate tangible proof of human empathy and reason expanding to protect those who have historically been the most marginalized, exploited, or abused.
It is empirical evidence of a species actively, structurally deciding to be kinder.
And that is why your deep desire for a better world is not just a solitary wish thrown into the void. It is part of a massive collective human project. It is a project that has been succeeding slowly, quietly, and persistently for thousands of years.
You are part of a vast, silent majority that values life, kindness, and cooperation over destruction.
As we draw our time together to a close, we want to leave you with 3 gentle reminders. These aren't just platitudes. They are simple, beautiful truths, pulled directly from the historical data for you to carry with you when the world feels dark again.
First, your mind is built for peace. Violence is not an unavoidable mounting urge that humans are doomed to express like pressure in a steam pipe. You are fundamentally equipped with empathy, self-control, reason, and a moral compass that actively, consistently steer you toward cooperation.
Second, the scary things you see on your screen are the exception, not the rule. The media ecosystem highlights tragedy precisely because it is shocking and out of the ordinary. It preys on your availability heuristic. But the data proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are living in the safest, most peaceable era in all of human existence.
And third, progress is made by people exactly like you. The massive declines in cruelty over human history didn't happen by magic, and they weren't handed down from on high. They happened because billions of ordinary humans simply decided to value each other, to trade fairly, to read books that challenged their perspectives, and to actively expand their circle of compassion.
You are part of that beautiful legacy. Never forget how much good is happening quietly all around you every single day. And before we go, consider this provocative thought. If our current media ecosystem is mathematically optimized to hack our evolutionary negativity bias, what would a social platform look like if its algorithm was actually optimized to highlight and scale our better angels instead? How quickly could we accelerate this long piece if our technology reflected our true cooperative reality?
Thank you for listening to Two Beans in a Pod. Please order the book from the link below.